Talking with Samir was both stimulating and deeply thought-provoking. As one of my son's closest friends, he brings a fresh, insightful perspective to life. He's articulate, an exceptional listener, and pushed me to consider ideas I'd never given much thought to before, like the power of humor in creating space for vulnerability. This turned out to be my longest episode yet, and we barely scratched the surface. Give it a listen and be prepared to reconsider a few assumptions about modern masculinity. Too many boys today feel lost, alone, and misunderstood. Too many parents feel the same. Behind today's troubling statistics is a generation of boys longing to be seen, heard, and valued. And yet the conversation around boys' emotional lives is still far too quiet. This new season of Unlocking the Parenting Code is here to change that. This season, you'll hear more real conversations with young men, more expert voices on boys' mental health, more solo episodes where I share truths I've learned firsthand, and more wisdom from parents walking this road right now. It's time to open our eyes, open our hearts, and become the change our boys need. Boys aren't broken. They're waiting for us to truly see them, hear them, and stand with them. So tune in to Unlocking the Parenting Code for real conversations, real hope, and a new path forward for our boys. It's time. They're ready. Are we? Welcome back to Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. I'm your host, Kathy. Today's guest is someone I've been genuinely curious to learn more about. Samir Aweidah is a creative and critical thinker who values nuance, a word that feels especially important when we're talking about boys, men, and the emotional terrain that they navigate. He's someone who believes that as long as respect is present, we can delve into anything, agree, disagree, and still find connection. Though I've only had the chance to meet Samir briefly, it's the way that my son speaks about him, both as a friend and a human, that made me really excited for this conversation. When someone you love and respect holds someone else in such high esteem, you pay attention. And I had a strong sense that Samir would bring something grounded, open, and deeply thoughtful to this space. I'm so grateful that he said yes to this conversation. So, Samir, welcome to Unlocking the Parenting Code.
Thank you for having me. That was a really nice introduction. I feel so welcomed.
Well, you are. You're genuinely
Thank
and
you.
heartfelt. You are welcomed.
Thank you so much.
So, Samir, I'm going to start with the same question that I started with Toshi because I was so surprised at I found it so interesting the way people respond to this. So, if someone were meeting you for the first time and wanted to really understand who you are, not just what you do, what would you want them to know?
I would want them to know that I am operating at a very high level of understanding for whoever I'm communicating with. And I believe that that's a very important thing for people to know just so that they can try to be as comfortable as possible to open up and, get to know each other. I think once there's a high level of understanding, you can, for me at least, I can let go a bit and not calculate too much of how I'm going to operate in a social situation. So I think that would be my main thing that I would want people to know.
Okay. Before we get into the bigger themes of masculinity and identity and mental health, I'd
Mm,
like to hear about where everything began for you. Like you said that you grew up with two young parents who were balancing life and parenting at the same time. What
yes.
was it like growing up?
Very, very layered, very complex. I grew up for the most part of my life in Doha, Qatar. Grew up there from the ages of 5 to about 18. Yeah, my parents are relatively young for having a 31-year-old child. I would say my dad is in his early 50s, and my mom is probably in her mid 50s or towards the end of her 50s. Um, and so growing up, I think I was exposed to a lot of, let's just say, people in their mid to late 20s trying to balance, like you said, being parents and trying to show me how to act in a responsible manner, while also them trying to live their life. And it was a way I think I saw them trying to maintain their mental health just as people. Because I think something that happens when we get older is we end up getting to the point where you look at your parents as people instead of just parents. They were people way before I ever stepped on the earth. And I think growing up, I think I was exposed to that at a very early age. So I think that also ties to probably my level of understanding of why people do what they do, how they operate. Not everything is the show of is we when we reference our parents, sometimes I feel like we're referring to a show instead, like they're actors, which for the most part they are. They're putting on a show, but they're also trying to make sure that we're learning from them because we're very impressionable when we're younger. Um, but I think it's important to show, let's say, the raw and like real side of who they are as people, because then as you get older, then you understand maybe how to handle yourself and not put too much pressure on yourself to be a certain way socially or just privately even by yourself, where you might put some pressure on yourself. So I think growing up, I was around parents that were very multifaceted. They were both working, very hardworking individuals. And then when it came time to letting go and enjoying life, I also saw that side of them, and it was nice. It was kind of like I was invited to the party, even though I was very underage to be invited to the party. But it was again insight on what it's like to grow up and be an adult, I would say.
Were you an only child?
Uh, yes and no. I think me and my sister have 11 years between us.
Okay.
And so for the first 11 years, I was an only child. And then we both, me and my sister, we actually laugh at the fact that we both kind of grew up as only children because by the time I left the house, by the time I was 18, she was 7.
Hmm.
And so she still hadn't gone through her formative years. That was still right around the corner for her. So by the time I left, the house was hers. So she was about to enter her time as a child, as an only child, let's say. So
Yeah.
when you meet, we've been told separately when you meet both of us that there's a bit of an only child complex that's happening, but there's also a very high level of consideration for other people because
Mm.
we grew up with, as, being Middle Eastern and stuff. We have a lot of extended family that we grew up around. So even if I was alone in the house, only next door or the 2 doors down, there was a couple of aunts, a couple of cousins that were sending food over, or I was going over to eat with them. So there's a very interesting balance to that question, I would say.
Yeah, actually, you reminded me of that was one of the things that drew me towards taking the family to the Middle East is because of
Mhm.
the way the family is regarded and how children are regarded and that kind of a culture. There's some really beautiful things about it that I don't think exist in North America very much anymore.
It's very it's sometimes sometimes I wonder in our culture if there's ever such thing as crossing the line. There's no such thing in our culture as that. They almost don't know the concept of maybe just give me a little bit of space. It would be nice. But
Mm.
but I think to a fault it comes from a very good place of community and knowing that like you'll never really go through anything alone. Even if you think you're going through something alone, you can always. My mom in particular, always likes to remind me, even at 31, she goes, Even if you leave the house, just know that wherever I'm living, you can eventually just come and live with me. And I would think that's there's something sweet about that because there's something also I think in her mind where it's like the classic thing about the mom in particular where she will never look at you as more than just the child that she had. She'll even if you get older and you become a man and it's clear that you're no longer a child, she'll always see you as her baby in a way. So it's like okay,
Well, there's
I
that
can I
protective
can
part
relate
of it that just
exactly.
it never stops. But I had the same experience with my dad. He was the
Yeah.
one that told me when I was a young adult having some challenges, and that's what he said. If it ever gets too hard, this is your home, and you always have your home. And that was enough
Exactly.
for me to push through some hard times, just knowing that that door was open. So, yeah, it's interesting the messages that we can take from our parents.
I
What's
agree.
one memory maybe that you have from those early years that still shapes the way that you see yourself today, and especially yourself as a male, as a young man?
It's a really good question because I guess traditionally, because we did grow up in the Middle East, and in the Middle Eastern culture, there is a very specific, let's say, gender roles where it comes to the male does this and the woman does this. But in my household, I think it was kind of against the grain, like because my mother was not only was my mother working all the time, but she had a very good job, and she at very various times in our life, I feel like she was probably the breadwinner. So I think my vision on the roles of what it means to be a man is maybe sometimes a little skewed compared to what the tradition is. Because in my household, I saw everyone picking up and doing what they had to do. The same way my dad got up in the morning to go to his corporate job, my mom was getting up to do the same thing. And in the Middle East, it's a bit more normal to come back home for lunch, especially when you have children. You spend a couple of hours at home, and then you'll go back to work and maybe work. And instead of working till 5, you might work till 6 or 6:30, for example. Um, so I think that that was actually I had this memory in mind when I knew the concept of the show before I came on because I was wondering what does it actually mean to me to be a man? Because in all honesty, Kathy, I don't think I really think about that question very often because of how I was raised. I think what I saw growing up was there was really no difference of what my dad was doing compared to what my mom was doing. Everyone was kind of picking up the same type of weight. Um, and my mom, I think, in particular, had my mom is the youngest of 5 siblings, so she has a she has a very big personality, and she attracts a lot of attention no matter where she is. She's a very friendly type of person. So in my household, I think sometimes she took on more of the role of where she would attract the most attention compared to my father, I think.
Mm.
So for me, being a man is it's a very layered question that sometimes I think even when I'm operating day to day, I'm like I look at I stop and when I say things or I'm acting a certain way, I'm like I feel like I'm acting more like my mom right now than my dad. Um, uh, but of course, in the manner of how I saw my mother growing up, it was just more normal that everyone was doing the same thing. So I think she was doing the traditional things of being the protector, being the provider, and so was my dad. So in our house, it wasn't really like the man is only going to do this and the woman is only going to do that. And I think it made it a bit more open-ended for me to sort of define the way that I will handle myself, the way I see accordingly. Um,
So
yeah,
there's more things that as we go on that I want to talk about that get into that, but part of it
sure.
I think is the the unconscious biases that we do have that we don't recognize that are unconscious, and that
Sure.
those they impact what we're doing. So what society, whatever society you're living in, whatever um, the outside influences are, sometimes they can really, not sometimes, they often really shape, what you start to think it really means, even when you're really grounded in a more balanced view. But we
Hmm.
don't talk about it, and you know,
I, I think you're right though. I think in particular when I left the Middle East to go to Canada, I think that started happening more because I was truly away from that environment that had molded me.
mhm,
And now I was being exposed to a very different way of living, a very different standard of norm in society, and in certain parts, being reminded of your role as a man. And so then in my early 20s, once I had sort of been very cemented in a very balanced environment, I was like, okay, now am I lacking in certain ways? Am I not lacking in certain ways? Should I be taking certain things into consideration? Especially around that time, when I moved to Canada, I was in my early 20s. I must have been 21 or 22. So in my 20s, I feel they were the most confusing times of all. So
yeah.
you tend to be very let's say gullible to some of your own thoughts, even if they're not very rational, let's say.
I think the 20s are the toughest decade that people go through, but I think that males in the 20s, it's kind of a double whammy because
Mm,
um, you know, the final part of your brain is not being developed until your mid to late 20s.
mhm,
Females in general develop at least a year and a half um, faster. Uh, Yeah, at some point, and then you catch up at some point.
mhm,
But the 20s, especially for young men, it's kind of like we really set them up for not for success. So there's these expectations of society that now you're a man, so you start acting like a man and do what a man is supposed to do. But
mhm,
inside, there's just too much of the little boy that's still in there, that is confused, that doesn't quite know, how to handle these particular stresses and pressures. So actually, this ties really well into what I want to talk about next. Like it was one of the big
Sure.
things that I wanted to get into a little bit because you had written risk and excitement is what we're looking for. And when understood, it's a positive aspect to hone. So tell me, what does understood risk? What do you mean by that?
I think understood risk is because risk without failure is not possible. You have to fail in order to take some risk. And the quicker you fail, the more exciting it is because you'll learn faster. And the quicker you learn, the more likely the risk becomes a success, in my opinion.
So how do you
And
distinguish between a healthy risk and reckless behavior?
so, so it's a great question. Um, I think risk is also one of those words where it's very layered, right? It's a spectrum how what type of risk we're talking about. It could be a career risk, it could be a monetary risk, it could be physical risk, it could be harm, it could be so many different things. But I think when I wrote that sentence, I was really more talking about the things we want to do that sometimes seem so surreal and outlandish, but that's only because they haven't been put into practice and they haven't been applied. Which most of the time, when you're thinking by yourself and you're internalizing things, there's a thin line between envisioning and then there's a thin line to where you start overthinking things, and
Hmm.
that's a very slippery slope, in my opinion. So the risk I think I was referring to was uh, I think in my early 20s, I got exposed to a lot of things that opened up a part of my brain that was never opened up before. And even now, I think even the last 2 years, I've been, let's say, poking at that side of my brain a bit more to open it up a bit more and take those risks for things that we would like to do and achieve that maybe fall outside of the traditional career path or the traditional way of expressing yourself or traditional way of traditional hobbies that people may have. And so I think that's really what I mean by the quicker you are to just take the risk, like jump. We used to have a mentor, and he passed away unfortunately a couple of years ago. And he always used to tell us that you should just jump, take the leap.
Yeah.
And I think when I first met him, I I must have been in my mid or late 20s, and I still, again, like we just said, that that part of my brain was still being developed, and I don't think I was really aware of that at the time or fully aware of it. Um, but now every time I think of sentences like that, or if I'm in a headspace of risk or things that I want to do that I maybe have not done, I think of Steve, and I remember him always telling me, like, simplifying sometimes our discussions back and forth, and he'd just be like, just jump. Like, what are you gonna lose? You either it's either gonna be successful or you're gonna learn something so that you can make it successful the next time. So there's really there's no loss in doing it, as long as, of course, it's a physical harm, which is not what I was referring to.
Yeah. Well, I read some stuff. I wrote it down here so I wouldn't forget it. But there's a psychologist, and his name is Dr. Michael Reichert. And he
Hmm.
talks about something. Do you know any of his work?
No, I've never heard of
He talks about developmental adventure, and he says
it.
that that's the idea that boys need to take. This is a different kind of risk. I think this is more like kids are growing up in a world today that is very protected. If you
Yes.
look at some of the playground equipment from the 60s, you would never see that in a playground, today. So it's very much protected, structured world more so that children. So that's kind of what he's addressing, but there's some, connection between this. But he says the idea that boys need to take risks in order to grow, but that the key is that these risks are supported. So not just leap off a cliff, but leap where someone's at the bottom, ready to catch you or cheer you on. In
Mm.
contrast, when that kind of structure or mentorship is missing, boys often will take risks, but in isolation. And that's sometimes where problems can happen. So you were talking about your mentor,
Yes.
Steve. So although you were older, it's kind of like the same thing. It's not so much that he's actually your net at the bottom, but in some ways, that's all we need sometimes is just someone to say, just do it.
I think, Kathy, I think it's actually exactly the same. I think the last part of what you said, I didn't really highlight in particular, which is, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's the net that someone is going to catch you, or something along those
Yes.
lines.
Yes.
And Steve actually taught me something very similar to that. And the other part of the quote that you just mentioned was that sometimes it's more likely to happen in isolation.
Mhm.
Correct? That
Yeah.
and I think in my early 20s, because when I moved to Canada, I moved alone. So I was living alone and I was experiencing probably the highest amount of isolation I've ever experienced in my life. And I probably met Steve when I was 4 or 5 years into living in Canada, and he used to. I met him because he used to host these. He used to call them circles, and he would invite all
Mm.
these younger individuals sometimes, not necessarily younger, but a lot of younger individuals, and we would sit and have discussions very similar to how we're discussing right now. He would ask us questions. It would be very thoughtful, critical thinking type of discussions. And I think it was very difficult for me in the group setting to feel as comfortable as I would feel with him one on one, or if I as comfortable as I would by myself. And he kind of, in a not in a very direct way, but a very indirect way, uh, kind of pushed me to take the leap in that bigger setting to express myself and be okay with being like to participate in discussion that sometimes you wouldn't feel the confidence to do so. And then
Well,
by
that's
the end of
something around, so that's something around the expectations of being a man too. It's not society-wise, it's not so accepted for men to be vulnerable and,
Mm,
showing any kind of a weakness or anything that's not a strength. So, you know, like you were really lucky that you were able to have someone like that who
mhm,
who, you know, provided that kind of an environment for you because it is not that common, but I think it's really critical. And where I see really positive movement today for, males is that type of a group where men are getting together and really talking and having these conversations. And I read some, I don't know, some research or data someplace, but it was just talking about how important these conversations are because in the past there hasn't been enough of these conversations, and that between males and males, like that's usually
mhm.
where you will, have the understanding and the support, but you have to be able to be vulnerable to do that. So that's pretty impressive, like pretty powerful stuff.
It was very powerful, and I think just to clarify, the circles were actually both men and women,
Hmm.
and I think that might sometimes add a bit more of the pressure of like, okay,
Yeah.
uh, let's be a bit more vulnerable than usual, even though I actually really love that you highlighted this part because I think growing up, I'm right now I'm staying with my aunt in Jordan, and she's I always tell her and my mom that I was raised by three women and one man growing up. That's how I was raised. So I think there is a little bit of a cheat code that I was exposed to, which is I was raised around a lot more feminine energy sometimes than male energy. So I think I'm able to, or I was exposed to the idea of being vulnerable at a very young age. Um, but I think what Steve allowed me to do was accomplish a couple of things that I was very intimidated by, which is, let's say, if it's me and two people, I can be myself and I can be completely vulnerable. But once the group starts getting a little bigger,
Yeah.
there is a slight intimidation that I used to feel. Um, and I think in those contexts where we would be in a circle and I would sit and look, and there would be anywhere from 8 to 12 people all trying to pick at one little thought, and everyone has to be considerate of the other so that everyone can actually get their thoughts out. And then what I tend to do a lot of the time if I don't feel comfortable is I like to listen, just to understand where are people willing to go with the discussion, what are they maybe not saying that I think is important to be said. And so I was exercising a lot of very important skills and habits from listening, giving people space, and then trying to implement myself in the environment so that I could be as vulnerable as possible, or maybe highlight things that's important for us to maybe dive a little more deeper into in relation to what we're already sort of discussing.
Many people don't have very strong communication skills. And
Hmm.
the ability to be able to really listen and communicate, like really connect and communicate, I think it's probably one of the most important skills that we can have. So,
Absolutely.
yeah. Okay,
Absolutely.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead, Kat. Sorry, I'll always end up rambling if so. I'm gonna always cut them short so we can stay on time.
Well, there's another thing. It's connected with this, but and it's something that I feel quite strongly about. So, um,
Hmm.
it's the concept that, like historically, boys, when they were moving from boyhood into manhood, they would have some kinds of a rites of passage, and they would go through a challenge. There'd be some mentorship, and then they'd be reintroduced into communities. And today, most of those rituals are they're not evident anymore. There's a few things like a bar mitzvah and some of those things where you recognize that point where you move from being a boy and you move into manhood with the responsibilities that go with that. For girls, it's really easy because the minute she has her first menstrual cycle, she's moved out of childhood into womanhood, and you feel like you are part of this club. You get special benefits. You can get out of PE if you don't want to do PE. Like, there's all kinds of things, but societal wise, it is understood that you've made that move. For young boys, there really is no such mark to say boyish behavior should be behind you now. And what often happens when you don't have some kind of a ritual or a rites of passage, then boys will search for that meaning, that transition, and it will either be behavior in the locker rooms or on the street or in the dark corners of the internet. Um, do you know Richard Reeves?
No, I don't know what you're doing.
You would love him. He is one of my favorites. And he talks about this. He's written a book or two, and he really has some good things. But um, he often says that when boys don't have these rites of passage, when there is not some way for that little boy who is moving into manhood to recognize that it's time, like for
Hmm.
whatever it is. Like sometimes it will be, you'll feel okay when you get your driver's license at 16, or you know you have your first official drink when you're the legal age, or you have your first girlfriend. Like those might be considered like a rites of passage. You're moving out of one developmental stage into another. But often what happens is that when there isn't something, you get this you can get this negative need, this negative reaction to prove yourself. So so you
Hmm.
have to be, you have to, race your car faster than the other guy, even though, you might kill one another, or a variety of different ways, but you have to kind of prove. And often you're proving it in not healthy ways, and sometimes really risky behavior. So what do you think about like rites of passage and the impact it has currently, and what if we did go back to having, rites of passages, and do you think it would make a difference?
Uh, that's a very like a question I don't think I've ever thought of because the whole time you were talking, Kathy, I was thinking about certain times throughout my life where I felt like okay, I've maybe elevated myself to become, let's say, a bit more independent as a person. And usually independence to me makes me feel like a bit more of a whole individual, which just by default makes me feel like more of a man, because I'm able to sustain myself. I'm able to not rely on anyone to do certain basic things. Um, but I'm wondering if your point earlier of when men fully develop their brain compared to women has something to do with this as well, because there can be a rite of passage maybe, but I feel like with men, I don't know if it'll land always, because men can be very reckless sometimes. We can be very also stubborn. We can be. My father always likes to remind me. especially in my mid 20s, he would always remind me when he would see me a little lost and I'd be asking all these unnecessary questions about when things is gonna work out, are things ever gonna work out, and sitting and worrying and stuff. And he'd always remind me that he he felt like he was truly complete in all his sort of manly, let's say, as a man duties, by the time he was in his late 30s, where he felt completely like, okay, everything starts to completely make sense. And it really opened my mind up because to me, growing up, he was like he felt complete when I was
Yeah.
younger. But that's also from coming from the vantage point of someone so young, which anyone could have held that. But the older I got, he still continued to feel that, and I feel like I have a pretty good read on people in general to know if they're telling the truth or not. So when he said that to me, he kept re-reminding me of it. But the first time he said it to me, it really struck a chord with me where I was like, I think everyone has their own pace because even you were saying how men tend to prove, they have this thing where we have to prove. Um, and sometimes where you feel like you have to prove, there's a bit of an act happening. It's not always the real truth of where that person is in their progression or in their development. Um, so I think when it comes to men, it's very layered, it's very nuanced, like we kind of touched on in the beginning. I don't know if a rite of passage, because there's also a certain, for example, like you mentioned the menstrual cycle, excuse me, for women. There's also, the men go through their own sort of thing in their early teens, mid-teens, with puberty and whatnot, and that's sort of also an indication of, okay, they're on their way to becoming a man, but then
But who celebrates
uh,
that? I mean, we
no one
don't even
celebrate.
talk about it.
We don't really talk about it, but I mean, I was thinking about it right now as I said the sentence. It's like it's very, it's convenient that it happens to the man because it's a very surface level thing. Because then once you maybe dive more deep into an individual, you're like, oh, okay, this person is still a boy. They're not. I mean, they look like a man, but they're still acting
Yeah,
like a boy, for
but
example.
that's kind of a thing that like I question, why should little boys go through a lot of that on their own? A little girl, when she has her cycle, she has the
Hmm.
support and the understanding of all the women in
Hmm.
her world. The little boy doesn't talk about that.
I think it has to do with being vulnerable.
Yes,
I think it has only to do with that. Yeah, I mean, even as much as I love my father and he's done so many incredible things, he still lacks a bit of vulnerability, for example. And I think, like I said earlier, I was raised with way more women in my life than men. So I was exposed to it's okay to be vulnerable. I think it's actually very okay for it. It's almost kind of weird actually in my as I'm getting older that even with my male friends, if I can't be as multifaceted as I feel and I believe that I am with my male friends, then I feel like it's not a true, let's say, friendship or relationship that I have with them. It is what it is. I'm not gonna sit and try to convince them to be a certain way or anything because at the end of the day, I have so many friends that I value to this day, male friends in particular, that we can both sit down and pick each other's brain and we can be, let's say, quote unquote manly. We can be not manly. We can talk about sports. We can talk about philosophy. We can talk about how we feel that day, how things make us feel. So I think ultimately it probably comes down to that and the acceptance of what it means to be vulnerable. Because I guess sometimes I think about it for culturally our purpose, but I think society-wise, outside of my culture too, I think for the man to be vulnerable is not fully accepted. I think yet.
no, and like I've noticed, but I don't, I can't say anything with any, authority or whatever, but
Sure.
I've noticed that young men who have had a variety of experiences, like you've experienced, different cultures, different, perhaps different religions, different ways of people being themselves. Those are the young men that I seem to have conversations with where their ability to be more open-minded and vulnerable in conversation is higher. And I don't mean to, not that one's right and one's wrong, but men who I've had conversations with whose life experiences are perhaps a little bit narrower as far as really experiencing different kinds of people, different cultures, different ways of thinking about the world. I find some of them to be very kind of stuck in society's rules about what it means to be a man, like real into the stoicism and vulnerability is not a conversation that we would, you know, be able to have.
I really like the correlation that you drew because I think there's a lot that comes from that, I believe. Because yeah, now that again, while you were talking, I was trying to think about growing up and how I grew up was to be. I grew up around everyone from every background, every culture, uh, every environment. I've lived in three countries in my life, and all of them provided that in particular. And I think that's something that I seek actually a lot. It's one of the criterias for me to kind of feel comfortable for me to continue exploring and developing as a person. You're right, though, I think, because you have to be exposed to other cultures to be able to maybe compare in a weird way what you were exposed to at home, or not just at home, but in family environments and whatnot. There's definitely
I
a
think,
correlation there, I think.
yeah, I think it opens your mind. Like one of the greatest gifts that I think that we've been able to give our son is experiences in other countries, especially in a part of the world that isn't usually looked on as very positive. And it's kind of when that's part of who you are, because you've spent you know, middle school and high school in a Middle Eastern country in classrooms that had, it's like a model UN inside of it, then
Hmm.
you have this great appreciation of, okay, maybe what you're seeing on TV or hearing in stories isn't the real picture. And even that little bit of a glimpse on reality, I think is a real gift to people. And then I have often thought, well, maybe we wouldn't have so many wars and turmoil and conflict if, like, when you're in these classrooms that are full of, different nationalities and cultures and everything, then you can't think about, if someone says, "Oh, we should start a war with this person," but then you think, but the my best friend who's sitting next to me, that's where he grew up and that's where his family is from. It has a different meaning, and so then I think, diplomacy and those things might be more possible because it's not just standing up for something or standing against something. You realize that it's all connected with human beings.
I think I think sometimes, or the thing that I learned the most living in Canada is there's a very interesting stat that I've picked up while I've been there. I've been there for almost a decade, and I've yet to make a Canadian friend, a full Canadian friend. And I don't know what that means, Kathy. I find it very interesting that I only noticed it in the last 2 years while I've been there. And I think my most Canadian friend is Toshi out of all my friends. and and if anyone spends any time with Toshi, you can tell he is way, way more than to just put him in the box of he is just a Canadian. He is very multifaceted, and being your formative years being in a place like Lebanon will open your mind up. It'll change a lot of the way you view things. But the more I do interact with people in Canada in particular, the more I realize maybe there's just a bit of lacking of exposure uh,
Hmm.
to the world. I grew up in a place for the majority of my life that's very small, and there was no such thing as a little China or Chinatown or little
Yeah.
Italy or these types of neighborhoods where certain nationalities would congregate. We grew up in a place where it was you're all on top of each other and you have no choice but to like actually coexist and learn how to coexist in class, through sports, through just socializing, through anything. And I'm lucky that I live in a place like Montreal, for example, where it's still a metropolitan city, but it still has there's something about it that feels a little bit small.
Hmm.
So everyone is connected at a very high level, especially in the city. So there is a bit more sometimes where you are exposed to people who have been, let's say, given the privilege of that exposure to be around different people. But I think that's probably where a lot of the disconnect of that little stat that I found the other day or the last couple of years, where I'm like, I wonder why that is, because when you're socializing, you're never really thinking about it like that. You just connect with who you connect with. At least that's how I was raised. And then
Yeah.
I guess the older we get, the more you realize being exposed to things changes the way you think, changes the way you view the world. It might also give you a bit of insight on why the world is the way it is right now, and in general. So yeah, I agree with what you said a lot, actually.
I wanted to talk a little bit about the emotional world of men in general,
Sure.
and often, we kind of paint their emotional world in broad strokes. We talk about, being strong and stoic and silent. And one of the things that you mentioned was connected with nuance. And so when it
Hmm.
comes to men's emotional lives, where do you think the nuance is often missed or misunderstood? When I was raising my son, I longed for a guide, something real, honest, and grounded in what boys truly need. So I created the book that I wish I'd had. Packed with tools and real world strategies that actually work, you'll learn how to nurture his emotional world and finally understand the feelings behind his behavior. Because boys don't need punishment, they need guidance. We'll bust the myths that keep boys boxed in and help you support him through the real challenges of growing up. Most of all, it's about transforming your connection, one small moment at a time. Raising boys who become remarkable men. Get your copy today, and let's create a beautiful future together.
Uh, I'm Before I answer the question, right, I think in the last couple of years I've been extremely obsessed with the concept of nuance. Because nuance is it's pretty much reading between the lines, in my opinion, right? That's kind of maybe the loose definition of it. Um, yeah, there's so many things that when it comes to men and how they manage their emotions or manage how we communicate and express ourselves, depending on how you were raised, and sometimes I'm sure I always hear through, let's say, through friends and stuff, where they're like, I'm not really having a good, very positive time communicating with my significant other. I don't really know how to get them to open up. That could be from both sides. Sometimes a female saying that about the male, sometimes the male saying that about the female. Um, it's really interesting because I feel like, again, this question really just comes back to what we were exposed to when we were growing up. Like, Uh, did you grow up seeing people communicate, whether it was male or female? Because again, in my context, uh, the male was never really communicating that much. They communicated in a very specific way. Like my dad was very active physically through sports and stuff, and he knew I liked to play sports. So that was his way of letting me know, like, let's bond, or
Hmm.
let's, like, I enjoy spending time with you, for example. But he would never actually say such a thing, but he would express it in his own way. And so those are the nuances that I think, for example, that I had to pick up on compared to my mom, and especially Middle Eastern moms all know this, where they're very overbearing sometimes, and where they can't contain
Yeah.
but express how much they love you and how you are, even if you do like some of the worst things in the world, they're like, yeah, but he's my son, you know, he's my son. There's no way that he's that bad of a person because I brought him to the world, which makes me laugh sometimes because I'm like, do you feel so highly about me, or because it kind of sounds like you feel highly about yourself more than you feel about me?
Yeah.
Um, so the when it comes to men, I think there's a lot of nuances on how we express that we would like to spend more time with our male friends, or how we would like to show appreciation to the people and the men in our lives. Sometimes it's not as easy for the majority of people in my life, especially the men, of course, to just be vocal about how you feel. There's a lot of, again, like very nuanced, like let's sit down and play some cards, or let's go have a drink somewhere, or you want to go have let's share a meal. I think that's how men express that they enjoy the company of their friends, or their fathers, or their male family, is like, let's do things together. And even while we're doing those things together, we're never going to really talk about how we feel about each other, but we're just going to enjoy the time. And I think that's sort of the nuance that I picked up on with men communicating how they feel uh, towards each other. I don't know if that answered your question fully. I might have lost track
Yes.
a bit.
Well, no, I stopped thinking about the question. I was just listening to what you were saying.
Okay,
Um,
sure.
but often, it's kind of sometimes I think when we think about communication and how we, should communicate, then
Hmm.
there's a tendency, and I don't know if it's because women are strong, like I don't know if that's it, but um, we almost like the way you were talking about it was almost like if your dad talked to you like your mom did,
Hmm.
then you would know exactly. It would be clear. So in that
Uh,
light, it's almost saying
hmm.
that we want men to if they're going to be able to communicate and be vulnerable and share their emotions and all this stuff, then they have to do it in the same way that women do it,
Uh,
basically.
I think in the broader sense, I think maybe it's fair to maybe pull from that, but you said something before you even finished the sentence, which is the way we should communicate. Um, but I don't know if there is a way we should communicate, because the same way I communicate with you will be very different compared to how I communicate with someone else, because of the need of what that person requires. You know, like there might be certain people that require a bit more clarity in communication, but there's some people that might require for them to be understood the way they would like to be understood. And I think that's kind of what I was maybe pointing out, because my father, for example, has his ways, and he does communicate, but in only a certain way about certain things. Does that make it better or worse? I don't know. I know that I know him, like I know who he is as a person, so I don't really have to sit around and wonder if if it's being received well, if it's uncomfortable. I just figured out the way to communicate with him in his own way.
Yeah, I agree with what you say. And I think, everything is individual, but
Hmm.
I also think that um, there's a lack of understanding sometimes on
Mm,
what is comfortable for each. So, you
sure.
know, I am most comfortable if you were a woman, I would
Hmm.
be most comfortable sitting face to face, making lots of eye contact, not a lot of background noise. Like that's just something that is the comfort for me.
I see. I
If
see.
I was a
Okay.
male, I probably would just be more comfortable sitting beside you, maybe like you're saying, talking while you're doing something.
Hmm.
There are some things that are more comfortable. And so when we understand those things and
Hmm.
when we respect them, communication is deeper. So it's a little bit more um, nuanced when, you're talking about adults. But because like my whole world has been working with children, and
Hmm.
I know that if I want to have a really good conversation with a little boy who has been sent to the principal's office because he's gotten in trouble again, and he comes into my office, if I sit him down face to face, what's the problem? What happened? I'm getting nowhere, and it's not respectful, in my
Mm,
opinion. But if
I
I
see.
respect that he needs a little bit of time to, self-regulate
Hmm.
and, hydrate, and then, if I go and I walk around the playground with him side by side and, get him to talk, like, tell me what happened. Just share the
Mm,
story with me. Let's talk about the story. Let's try to work this out. So I'm not, maybe I wasn't clear in the beginning. What I'm trying to plug is that there are ways that we're different in what
absolutely.
feels best. And when we recognize those differences, then our communication is more respectful and the connection is deeper.
I agree, actually. I think yeah, I was thinking about myself in school in moments like that. And I don't think I've ever had a moment like that where someone would actually take the time to just allow me to reflect, for example, on what happened. And I wonder if that might have helped me uh, when I look back on my experience at school. But in school in particular, I don't think I have very good memories of.
Most men don't.
Yeah, 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 I don't think I do now that I think about it. I also made a very conscious decision at a very young age that I'm not really going to school to learn, to be honest. I'm going to school because
Hmm.
it's a social thing.
Agreed.
Yeah, I'm going to hang out and I'm going to see what you were up to. What did you get up to since the last time I saw you yesterday?
Yeah.
I was really more curious about what you did after school yesterday instead of what we're going to do today at school. Um, but I think that would have maybe probably changed the way that I look at things because I value that a lot. Where I mean, sometimes it's nice to okay, something happened. It wasn't maybe a very positive thing, but it's nice to be given the space to reflect and it not be so rigid, let's say.
Well,
Where
it's
like
kind of like when you look at the statistics, the percentage of boys that, are disciplined harshly, more harshly than girls are, or, that get sent to the principal's office for trouble and all those things more. It's kind of like, maybe something's wrong with the system, but I think a lot of little boys start to feel there's something wrong with them. And so the whole
yeah,
school experience, is missing the point and doing damage in the long run. So it all boils down to understanding the differences and
hmm,
then kind of celebrating the gifts and the challenges and working together that way rather than being in a system that is geared pretty good for a female style of learning.
That's so interesting that you think about it like that. I never thought of it like that.
Oh,
Uh,
yes.
I never thought. I mean, but I guess because your perspective is more inside than it is, right? Because you're a teacher. So it's very different the way you're looking at it than how I would look at it as someone who's in the game, for example. Like I'm in it. I'm not seeing it from outside.
But
And
it
you've
was,
probably seen so many examples.
yes, but it really hit me when I saw it in my own son. Like it
I see.
really when, like so many little boys, when they start school, they go into kindergarten, they're so excited. Like they're going into the big school and like they're
Hmm.
so excited. And
Hmm.
little by little, that spark just gets shot because they can't sit as long as the little girls. They don't focus as well as the little girls. Developmentally, they shouldn't even be in there at the same age. Um, the expectations for academic curriculum is way too high for what's developmentally appropriate at that age and stage. So you get this little guy who he's always getting in trouble. He can never do anything as good as the little girls in his class. He knows the
Hmm.
teacher doesn't really care for him because, she's always having to talk to him. The only time he feels free is when he's got recess or PE. And little by little, year by year, so many little boys really start to internalize a lot of that, mask their own like authentic feelings, and just figure, they're not quite as good enough as the others because they don't. So it's not set up for them to be successful, and it can do a lot of harm.
You said one thing that is super interesting to me. You said that we shouldn't be like the men and the women shouldn't be in the same uh, class or something or at the same level at the certain ages.
Oh, yes,
I'm
yes.
paraphrasing, but can you just can you explain that a bit more? I find that very interesting. Like, is there an age difference you think, or what is it exactly
Yeah,
that
that's
means?
that's one of the things. If you start digging into Richard Reeves, like he's got
Hmm.
some really great ideas about how to make education more successful for boys. But one of them is, starting the little boys at least a year behind.
Wow,
Like they don't
interesting.
need to, like it makes so much sense. Like it just developmentally.
I
So
see.
instead of putting them in a race, I forget how Toshi worded it, but
Hmm.
listen to the other episode. But it's
Sure.
like putting two kids in a race, a girl and a boy, but making sure that the boy is, carrying a 50-pound weight on his back and then expecting him to keep up with the little girl in the race. It's not possible.
Interesting. So it
Whereas
just has to. Sorry, go ahead.
developmentally, yeah, well, I think you were
Sorry.
going to say it's developmental. That's what it is.
Yeah, I was gonna say yeah, it's about what we kind of touched on already earlier in the discussion, which was about how I guess there is just a significant difference between the way our brains develop um, between the male and the female. So I think that's probably where it comes from. Interesting. So it would be, I guess the data that you sort of touched on is like it would be a year or maybe even more behind.
Yeah. Well, there's I forget, I don't remember the details, but there was a whole movement thing that kind of got a negative twist to it. I think they say it's red shirting, but it was like connected with the outliers. I forget who wrote that book, but
Malcolm Gladwell.
Gladwell, yes. So he talks about that and starting boys later so that they would be taller and bigger so that connected with
Mhm.
success in sports.
Yes.
So it's not the same thing, but there's, it's kind of,
There's a yeah,
there's
there's a
that too.
correlation there.
Yeah.
There is a
Yeah.
correlation.
Something that you did speak about. I've only got a couple more things because I know I'm trying to be mindful of time, but I still want to get these things in.
Take your
You
time.
talk, you talked about, you said how hard it is for boys today to speak their truth. Why do you think that's true?
Yeah, I think maybe that one is a bit more. Okay. This one is I find very interesting because personally, I have certain ways that I believe for me that I can learn information and that I can express it. Now, I'm a very big fan of comedy. I love comedy. I love the way you can learn things through humor and through laughter because sometimes there are, let's say, subjects, discussions, topics that they might be a little too heavy for me personally, for them to just be taken in as they are. And I think over time, my way of expressing myself and the way that I like to learn things is through laughter. That's how I feel like I connect with people the most. That's how I feel the most comfortable with people as well, is when I feel like we can laugh about things that maybe you shouldn't laugh about. There's a nuance there that we're just trying to get a little deeper into something, and we're softening the pain for our own, for better or worse. But to me, whenever laughter is involved, I believe that it's for the best. Um, and I think depending as you grow older, you expose yourself around different people. Not everyone agrees with such philosophy, I would say.
Mm.
Some people, uh, I think, yeah, I think some people have struggled to understand the whole concept of the nuance. There's things that are layered. There's, I think, a skill that should be developed at a much younger age is learning how to read between the lines. What is being said without being said? Because not everything has to be so crystal clear. Sometimes it's good to provoke thought and, uh, exercise that critical thinking, the internalizing, reflecting, uh, that exercise. You learn so much about yourself through that. And I think most of the people that I would consider very close to me, my friends and my family, would all tell you that the way that I like to express myself most is through humor, because I feel like it's the ultimate way of being vulnerable. I think it's the ultimate way of letting go. I feel like it's the ultimate way of being present too. You don't have a chance to wonder too much. And if you're wondering, it's because we're making you wonder right now in this moment. We're not making you wonder later. We're not making you wonder before or anything. It's happening right now. And when someone makes you laugh, you're not thinking about should I laugh? It comes naturally. Your
Yeah.
body has your database knows that already. It's like, no, you actually find this funny. You're enjoying this moment without thinking about it. And through that, sometimes, like I said, not everyone has the same sense of humor. Some people will get offended by certain things. Some people will not get offended by certain things. Um, and I think for me in particular, I've learned so much, not just about myself, but people. I learned so much about people through this lens of, let's say, we can put it under the sense of humor category. But again, in my opinion, it's very layered. There's so many things there about. I think personally, I think it's a bit of a coping mechanism that I've developed over time, which again also sometimes it can be unhealthy, but I think for the most part, I'm just trying to make light of things that would be more heavy, let's say, so it's a bit more digestible.
So humor is a very interesting thing
Mm.
because so much of it is cultural.
Hmm.
So like
Yes.
So it's interesting. I've never heard someone kind of talk about, like that connection in communication with humor. It's interesting. And but that was the first thing I thought, like I can be sitting, you know, in Japan with my husband and turn on comedy that culturally is really funny. And I look
Hmm.
at it and I think that is not funny. And it just
Yeah.
like it is so personal. Comedy humor is so personal. So it's
Hmm.
interesting. I hadn't thought of that before, but I find it interesting. Um, just yesterday, I listened to a debate that was with three feminists, and they were on a podcast, Diary of the CEO, and I really like his
Hmm.
podcast.
Yes, it's a great one.
And these three women, so usually I'm not listening to feminists. I'm listening to the other side. So I'm trying to
Okay.
absorb all the new information and conversations around men. So it was
Hmm.
very interesting to listen to these three women because they all had a bit of a different take. Like they were definitely three different viewpoints about feminism even. But there was one, I wrote it down so like I transcribed it and wrote it down so I'd get it right.
Hmm.
But one of the things that was said that I found interesting, one of them said, um, some people say that masculine traits we used to channel into purpose, like protectiveness, risk, even
Hmm.
aggression. And now those are being pacified with porn, video games, or apathy. There's a growing conversation around pornography being a kind of super stimulus, something that hijacks the brain, sets unrealistic expectations, and erodes our capacity for real connection. How do you see porn shaping young men's understanding of intimacy, desire, and masculinity today?
Wow, what a question. Uh, that's a. I think that I think right now in particular because of let's say social media,
Mhm.
there is a very unhealthy amount of like excessive consumption across the board, right? Pornography, uh, news, everything. It sort of encompasses everything where we're overly stimulated,
Yeah.
and it can be very overwhelming. And I think when it comes to something like pornography in particular, it's kind of probably the worst way for you to learn anything about intimacy, for example, right? Uh, this also it's a very interesting discussion because um, Kathy, you asked me this question, and right now I've never actually spoken with my friends, or I don't really have memory of speaking with my friends of how they were sort of introduced to the idea of intimacy. Usually, it's of course the parents have the talk, but we've never really delved into that, which is making me wonder, like, how do people learn about it? Is it just through personal experience? Is it just, I guess that's how I would explain it for myself. But I think when it comes to pornography, I think it's just so unrealistic in a lot of ways. Um, it doesn't help again with something like social media where sometimes you're not even looking for anything of the sort, but because the way that social media is and how it's set up, you get fed so many
Yeah.
different things that you're like, okay, what is this? What is that? And so, social media, I think, has also exposed us to things that we would never really have thought to expose ourselves to sometimes.
But you see,
Um,
that's the whole thing too. Like when you're looking at, you know, a generation ago, it was,
mhm,
you had to go to the drugstore and you had to ask for the Playboy that was on the top shelf. Like you couldn't,
interesting.
it was not easily accessible and it was, two-dimensional. And the
Yeah.
really worry, there's two things about it that I find interesting and I don't know enough to, which is why I asked the question. Um,
Hmm.
One of them is the current situation today. And the thing is that with social media and children's access to screens constantly, it's
Hmm.
not even a question anymore about if they're going to run into it. It's when are they going to, and how are they going to react to it. And like you said, it's not even that they're going, they might be too young to be going out looking for it. But like
Hmm.
I still even in like I'll get messages on Instagram, private messages on Instagram, and I'll open it up. It's like, oh my God. It's because I didn't ask for it. It's like,
Of
why?
course.
So I think about young kids. So that's one part of it that I think is a problem. But the
Yeah.
other thing that think we're missing the mark at, and definitely it's an area that I want to understand more, but it's about testosterone. So
Mm.
I think that um, just the whole topic of pornography, it has a different impact on men as it does on women. It's not the same. But I don't think we really understand what those differences are. But I think, I can't prove it, but I think there are real differences there. And without that understanding, too, some of those conversations are challenges.
I was just about to ask you, would what would you say if you were to brainstorm, for example, what would be the fundamental difference, or a couple of things that stand out to you that are different between?
One is uh, so my understanding
Hmm.
is like if I want to uh, if I want to have, you know, I don't know even what the vocabulary is, but
Sure.
if I want something down that road, I will probably want to read an erotic novel,
I see.
and
Yeah.
that will connect for me. If I'm a male, I'm going to probably want something visual, and that is going to work for me. But I don't know the whys behind I don't understand, but I think that's part of it. Like I'm someone way down the road, and still I don't have that part figured out. But the world that boys are growing up in today, those draws, those opportunities, even if they're not looking, can be taking that, like that's kind of what I said with the dark corners of the internet, like to
Yeah.
places that, they innocently fall into.
Yeah, I think yeah, because I wonder if I feel like if I was to make a very broad assumption, uh I think most of society probably doesn't have a very healthy relationship with the discussion of intimacy, for example.
Yeah.
Uh, it's again, it's an assumption. It's not right or wrong, but it's really based on, I guess, just living and listening to people and them expressing themselves on the matter. Um, I really love the whole discussion we're having because every time I have a moment of silence to myself while I'm listening, I keep reminding myself that how important communication truly is at its core. Um,
Yeah.
it's so multifaceted. It just accomplishes so many things when you zero in and try to really focus on how important it is to communicate. Because you can really solve so many things by just being open to learning and being a little vulnerable. There's a
And
quote that
being
I
curious, being really curious to understand each other.
absolutely, I think being curious is curiosity is one of those traits when I meet people. I think most of my very good friends are very curious people. they make me think a lot. Even if you think that you've thought it inside out, and then they bring something up, and you're like, oh my God, okay, I have to go back to the drawing board. I have to brainstorm again, which is it's a good thing. Um, it's a good thing. I wonder, sometimes I wonder if the majority of people are open, because sometimes curiosity, like if someone brings up something, and let's say it could be a bit more personal, someone might interpret it as like maybe they're taking an attack on me or my
Yeah, it's
personality,
triggering.
or triggering. Uh, which leads me to, there's a quote that I'm going to paraphrase a bit, but someone once said that if someone criticizes you or has some criticism, take a moment to see if there's any truth in it, because there's a pretty high chance that there might be a little bit of truth there that you can learn from. Criticism is not necessarily a bad thing, in my opinion. I guess people like to put constructive criticism in front of that word so that it softens the blow a bit. But I think there's always some truth out there that, and you know how most of humanity struggles, I think, with the concept of absorbing truth, because it can sometimes strike a little hard. But I think it's important to expose yourself to the truth beyond just your perspective, because
Mm.
it's not you're not always seeing how you're acting. Other people are seeing it, and I think that's the true uh, a true definition of like self-awareness, is being able to see it from your vision and pulling yourself out of your scenario and looking at it from another view. Like, can you see yourself from the top or from the outside looking in? Uh, that is true. I feel like the truest level of self-awareness.
There's something a little bit different, but and this similar kind of thinking was the whole concept of like a mirror um,
Mm,
reflection thing. And so if that person lashes out at you for some reason, that 9 times out of 10, whatever the topic is, whatever the issue is, it is there's something in them that is
yeah.
worried or concerned about that particular thing. They're not dealing with it and they're putting it out to you. So criticism, yes, I love criticism when it helps me grow and think and develop. But if that criticism is also coming from a place of the other person trying to work out their own things, then, you know, I wouldn't necessarily take it with the same depth.
Absolutely, absolutely. I think we feel that when it's when you should maybe put your guard down and listen. There's something that is being communicated that could be of value here. But
Oh,
I think
yes.
but I think even that requires a bit of practice, and it requires a bit of humility, which yeah.
Something that has really helped me and continues to
Hmm.
is whenever I get upset about what someone else is doing, it's the same kind of thing. It's like if I really stop and look deep in myself, I will be doing the same thing. I'm just not recognizing it. But I'm going to say something to the other person because it's bugging me. But it really has, I'm doing the same thing. And that's why I'm seeing it, is because I don't like it. But to be able to see it and then kind of go, I do that. I don't like that I do that, but that's why I'm seeing it in him. It's
Hmm.
interesting. It's interesting.
It's very interesting, because it's almost like a reminder that maybe address it, or maybe revisit what
Yes.
you once thought doesn't need to be addressed.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the avoidant uh, mentality. I'm guilty of that a lot in my life, where I think it's not that important to address, and then it'll explode in some type of way, and I'm like, okay,
Yeah, it'll let you
back to
know.
I'll be like, okay, back to the drawing board it is, I guess. So I
Yeah.
need to figure that part out.
Samir, I've got one final question. So there's
Sure.
a lot of talk right now, well, not just right now, but there's a lot of talk about how the definition of manhood and masculinity is shifting. So when you
Hmm.
think about what kind of masculinity the world needs right now, not one that we've inherited, but one that we could build upon, what are the key traits or values that would come to mind about masculinity?
I would say that there are a lot of things traditionally of what you should do as a man that are valuable. However, there are also a lot of things traditionally of what you should be a man that I don't think are of service anymore. That's my personal opinion. My opinion, I think, is we should be able to vocalize a bit more, be open to discussion. Uh, Vulnerability is a very powerful thing, in my opinion. It's proven to me in my life with all my male friends, female friends, family members that being honest, being vulnerable, it goes a long way.
Yeah.
Um, Allowing people to, because I think sometimes all it takes is seeing someone do that, then it's like, okay, maybe I can do that.
Yeah, the ripple effect.
Um, the ripple effect, exactly. And I think a huge thing that changed the way that I operate just as a person, I think, is when I lived in the UK for about a year when I was 21. I think I felt the highest level of homesickness I had ever felt. And during that time in particular, I was having a very tough time managing my thoughts. There was so many things happening. They're firing all the time. And I came across the concept of meditation, and I came across just the idea of how simple it is to just sit down and focus on one thing, just your breathing, the thing that we're doing all the time without you even noticing. Listen to the rhythm of it, listen to what's happening, be here, like be present is sometimes there's like a very fine line of like, are they preaching or are they telling something that's true when they say be present? I really think it's more the latter, which is like there's something very valuable about being present right now, instead of thinking about what's going to happen in a month, what's going to happen in a couple of years. I think this year in particular has proven to me that my mental health has got so much better because I think about what's happening right now and I'm right here right now. And I think to add on to the question, uh, being a man or of this new era, let's say, the idea of discussing mental health is something very valuable. I think that should be something that should be discussed more, because I think probably generations before me have a lot of interesting coping mechanisms that they think is helping, but it's probably doing a bit more harm than it is helping. Uh, so those would be what I would say. A bit of some traditional stuff that I do enjoy is, being the provider, being a protector, but there's also space for vulnerability and knowing how to communicate and listening, being aware of yourself and the people around you.
I think we have to have another conversation because I mean, I didn't get to half the stuff that I wanted to talk about, but I was just thinking when you were talking, because mental health is really, I want it to go like I would like to go very deep into that. So maybe somewhere
Sure.
down the road I'll have, a bunch of young men as a group, like, maybe have
Hmm.
four of you and really talk about some of this stuff with mental health. So
I
anyway,
would, yeah, I would
you'd
love
be
to.
doing, yeah.
I would love to. I'd love to. Absolutely.
Uh, Samir, before we finish today, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you really wish we had of?
Mm, honestly, no. I admitted it when we started. Because Toshi is a very, very good friend of mine, I was very curious to watch the episode that you guys did, but he will definitely understand the side of me that I really do enjoy the element of surprise. I enjoy the spontaneity of not knowing what really to expect. So I came in completely just open-minded. I also, like I mentioned to you through message, that I really love the concept is very interesting. I like interesting things. It's very provoking of thought and whatnot. So there's really not much that I would like to talk about more than what we've already discussed. And yeah, just thank you for having me and providing the space. I felt very welcome throughout. So thank you very much.
Yeah, well, I love talking to young men. I think that's probably my favorite group of people. And because I really believe that the conversations, will have a positive impact. Like somebody who really needs to hear something from a young man, whether it's a young man themselves, someone a little bit not as old as you are right now, or a
Hmm.
parent or an educator, somebody is going to listen to this and think and just, I don't know, be more open-minded about. Well, the focus is males, so I might as well just say to be more open-minded and compassionate about
Hmm.
the challenges that males have. And by talking about it, then, it creates a little bit more compassion and that's what and understanding. And that's really what it's all about. So thank you for coming
Absolutely.
on because this kind of surpassed what I had high expectations. Toshi had built you up pretty high. So
Oh, great. I'm glad.
I am very pleased and feel privileged to have had the conversation with you. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Kathy. I really appreciate it.
And to our listeners, thank you for being with us. If this conversation resonated, please share it with someone raising boys or someone who is one. Subscribe, leave a review, and join us next week for another honest, heartfelt conversation here on Unlocking the Parenting Code, all about boys. Thank you for sharing your time with me today. Every conversation we have here is a step toward raising boys who feel seen, heard, and deeply valued. If you're looking for more support on this journey, I invite you to visit me at sonhoodcoaching.com. You'll find a link in the show notes. And as always, thank you for being part of this important movement. Until next time, take good care.